us tonight as part of the ChatGPT Malaysia community. I'm very pleased to be able to partake in this webinar as your host. So our topic today will be navigating the legal implications of ChatGPT, which will be the insights from a legal practitioner, our invited speaker, Parveen Kaur Harnam. Just to start, I am Alya Qistina. I'm currently the Chief Business Development Officer for Thomas Philip Advocates and Solicitors, which is a litigation law firm based in Hartamas. I will be providing practical insights on the application of ChatGPT and how this revolutionary technology has transformed my firm's practices, if any, and plus the approach that we took and our experimentation thus far within limitation. I will be joined tonight by Ms. Parveen Kaur Harnam, a prolific lawyer with over 70 published works, and she's also a Master of Commercial Law candidate at Universiti Malaya. Ms. Parveen will be providing much of the main contents that we will be discussing this evening. How are you, Ms. Parveen?
I'm good, and thank you for introducing me actually so well just now. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I really hope that what I present or what I talk about today would be of interest to everyone. So first of all, I'm actually going to be sharing my screen because wait, hang on. Pang, I need to be able to share my screen because I've got some slides. It says right now that I can't. Is Pang there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm just going to share it quickly. Okay. Okay. So these are my slides. So just a quick introduction. I'm currently a lawyer and I've been one since 2019. I'm also a Master of Commercial Law candidate. So quite recently in February, I wrote an article on ChatGPT, specifically the legal implications and how we are going to go about regulating. So this webinar today will be a more comprehensive version of that of that article, as well as some new insights, I hope. So I'll just go over very quickly what I'll be discussing. So I'll first introduce the link between ChatGPT and law. So we will look at AI specifically and how that links back to law, because ChatGPT is actually a form of AI. And then we'll look at salient legal issues. Now, because of time, I'm only going to be focusing on two issues. That's privacy and personal data protection, as well as intellectual property issues. And then I'll go into the impact. So for the impact, I'll be focusing only on the legal industry. And Alya, at the end of the presentation, will also add on to what I'll be talking about that. And then I will go into legal regulation. So how do we, since it's something that we don't really understand, how do we go about regulating it? So I will first discuss challenges, and then I'll move on to what are the forms of regulation we should go about? And of course, then I'll conclude my points. And throughout this webinar, anyone can just pose a question to me and I will stop and answer that. Okay, so first of all, let's start with the introduction. So you've got here two pictures. I've got Ava from Ex Machina and Samantha from Her. So this is just to give you a picture of what ChatGPT is, because ChatGPT is kind of like a human when it responds to your questions. That's how it works. It has a revolutionary ability to manipulate data and create human-like responses. So what does this mean essentially when you talk about in the context of law? So there are three main questions that we would have to have here. Number one, when you talk about the role, right, of ChatGPT, number one, would you say, or would we perceive ChatGPT to have the role of like a criminal? It's going to be a kind of program that breaks all laws and, it's like anarchy. Or would you say that it's something that's going to be supplementing law? That means it's going to help us be better lawyers. Or would you say it's going to be even beyond that? It's going to replace lawyers in the future. So these are some of the questions that we will try to address today. And of course, the last point that I want to add on just for this introduction is sentience. Now, as we know, ChatGPT has passed the Turing test. So that means it has human-like intelligence. So what does this mean in the context of regulation? This is an interesting point that we will look at throughout this presentation, actually. All right, so now let's look at the first thing, right? So we've got privacy and data protection. So as users of ChatGPT, and I hope whoever's here today, everyone would have had some experience with ChatGPT. So from your experience with ChatGPT, those of us who have created accounts, we must first remember that it actually collects your data on a broad scale. So the minute you've created an account, you have allowed them to have access to your data, and you have actually allowed them to collect it as well. And this is automatic. We will look at their privacy policy shortly, and and look at why it's problematic in the context of data protection. And then you've got the problem of disclosure. So that's the second one. The problem here is that when you have given basically by having an account, you have consented to them disclosing your data to third parties as and when they wish. So this is another legal issue that you have when it comes to ChatGPT. It's an issue of your personal information and what they can do with it, right? It's quite dangerous in that sense. And this is something you see with a lot of social media as well. You see Meta, Twitter, there's elements of this, but ChatGPT, for OpenAI specifically, their policy, right, their privacy policies is a bit questionable, even in the legal community. Some writers have talked about it. And you've got the third problem, which is that it retains your personal information. So it can, the minute you've keyed in things like any prompt in your chat box, right? Say you try to key in a few prompts in one chat box, you notice a pattern that they retain any information you key in. So say you key in personal information, maybe inadvertently, it is there for eternity. That brings us to the fourth point here, is that the right to be forgotten. This is a right that is entrenched in law, actually. It's that your data is being used without your consent, and you basically don't really have a right to correct it. Because when you talk about how ChatGPT functions, right, it's functioning on massive amounts of data that's already been keyed in, and it's using that data to answer all these prompts that we've got. So whatever inaccuracies it may have on certain people's information, that inaccuracies kind of stick because of the way it functions. So this is something that they would need to look at. Basically, OpenAI needs to look at this and work on this, essentially. So let's look at the excerpts here, right? From now I've talked about the issues. Let's look at why I say that these are issues. So if you look at their policy, you see that there is automatic reception. They receive automatically your information. Then you see number 3, even without notice to you, unless required by law, they can disclose your information to third parties, so like advertisers and things like that. And your rights. So this is, when you look at this point from the privacy policy, it's quite funny in a sense, because they've very vaguely said that you may have the right to access, to delete, to correct. Now, the word may here is important to note, because certain jurisdictions like ours, which we will look at shortly, in Malaysia specifically, when you talk about personal data, it's only protected in the context of commercial transactions. So you see that OpenAI is kind of sort of very, in a way, in a nasty sort of way, is going about laws in a very dangerous, it veers into very dangerous territory, because it only recognizes those jurisdictions which have statutory rights. So only if your country recognizes these rights in a broad context do you have these rights. So if your country doesn't recognize these rights in a broad context, then you don't have these rights. So let's look into why we say that. Okay, so we will first look at PDPA, right? That's our Personal Data Protection Act. So it's quite nicely put out, right? We have 7 principles. So I talked about some issues earlier. You see that these principles, the antithesis to those issues that I mentioned. You see, in our PDPA, you've got the fact that your data can only be processed with consent. You've got notice. So if your data is going to be shared with third parties, you need to be notified on it. And then there's disclosure. So you can't disclose without consent. You've got security. That means personal data needs to be protected. You've got retention. So it cannot be kept longer than necessary. So this is a problem when it comes to ChatGPT. And then you've got data integrity. It must be made sure that it's accurate. Again, a problem with ChatGPT. And then you've got access as well. This is another problem with ChatGPT. But we need to understand one very key point, is that in Malaysia, this only applies to commercial transactions. So that means banking transactions, insurance, investments. It doesn't necessarily apply to ChatGPT. So this is where we've got like a kind of lacuna in our Malaysian law. Compare that to your EU General Data Protection Regulation. So in the EU EU GDPR, they call it, right? It's kind of an influential regulation. It's very well recognized and really, in a sense, well regarded. Of course, it has its criticisms, but let's look at this legislation, right? It's a blanket protection. So that means it doesn't matter what you use. So in the context of ChatGPT, it also applies, right? So even if you use, even if you've sort of revealed your personal data in working activities or hobbies, there's a case actually, body links with. So it means that even in those cases, you are protected, and protection exists anywhere in the world. So an EU citizen that uses ChatGPT in Malaysia would still be protected. If they use it in Hong Kong, still protected. Singapore, still protected. And another very important point of the EU GDPR is that even special categories of data is protected. That means you've got like your race, ethnic, political allegiances, philosophical beliefs, even all of those all of that information is protected. So that's under Article 8. So this is the lacuna in Malaysian law that we need to look at. We need to overhaul our legislation basically if ChatGPT is here to stay, there needs to be a look at the PDPA to make sure that it mirrors a bit more the EU GDPR. So this is just a conversation point now, because data is a very huge issue when it comes to AI, and ChatGPT specifically, data is another very huge issue. Now let's look at the second very big issue here. You've got intellectual property. So one thing we need to note is that there are vast ranges of works that are actually copyrighted. So you've got literary works of books and things like that, literature. You've got musical works, artistic works. So that's under our Section 7 of the Copyright Act. Now, the point that we need to remember and note in the context of ChatGPT is the risk of copyright violations. So you see, the thing about ChatGPT is when it produces something for you, there's no guarantee that that information that it provides is entirely new and it's not copyrighted. There is no guarantee for that. So in cases like that, you have to remember that if you use anything that ChatGPT gives you that liability is on you. That's under Section 37. So let's look at a practical situation. We will look at the prompt that I keyed in to ChatGPT a little bit later. But a practical situation, like say Elon, right? Elon works at an ad agency. He keys in a prompt on ChatGPT. So what he wants is to create like an ad, like a jingle for an ad. But later it's found that that jingle that was created by ChatGPT, some of the lyrics mirror what a musical producer created. So in this case, Elon's the one that has to bear responsibility, although it was ChatGPT that created the prompt, because it was Elon that used what ChatGPT created. And then you've got another problem when it comes to ChatGPT. So it's been found, right? And I have confirmed it with my own, when I entered the prompt as well. ChatGPT can recreate or reproduce large portions of literature, like books. If you ask it to produce chapters of books, it's going to do that for you. And that's a problem OpenAI really needs to address, because this will trigger lawsuits in the future. And we'll look at that a little bit later. So now let's look at this prompt that I entered into. So I've actually asked ChatGPT here to create a jingle for me for a data plan ad for urban KL citizens. So you see here that it creates one, it seems very interesting here, but the issue is if this particular prompt, right, we're saying this is a hypothetical thing, but if these lyrics that it created was something that is copyrighted, then under Section 37, Elon, so say it's not me who keyed in this prompt, it was Elon who keyed in this prompt. Elon would have to pay possibly up to 25,000 in damages under Section 37 of the Copyright Act. So you see here that ChatGPT is not all is not well with ChatGPT. You've got a lot of legal, that's the word I used in my article was legal morass, because it's like mud, you don't know where you're going to go wrong. And then you've got this is another prompt I keyed in. I asked it to reproduce some paragraphs from the first chapter of Selina by A. Samaside, and it did so very nicely for me. So if I were a bit of a malicious person and I chose to share this all over social media or things like that, you see a really big problem here, because this chapter by A. Samaside and this book by A. Samaside is very likely copyrighted material under Section 7 of the Copyright Act. So you see here that there is quite an acute issue with intellectual property when it comes to ChatGPT, because there's a lot of gray area, I would say, legal gray area that it doesn't really pay attention to, that OpenAI doesn't sufficiently pay attention to, because it's so new. A lot of us don't know all these things about ChatGPT. Okay, now let's look at the impact of ChatGPT specifically on lawyers. So I've looked at 3 areas here. Of course, there's a lot more areas when it comes to how far ChatGPT affects people and general industries. There are many industries that will be affected and have already been affected by ChatGPT, but I'm looking at the legal part for today. So first of all, you've got legal education. So as we know, there's already been a lot of talk about plagiarism when it comes to ChatGPT, right? So there's an issue of academic dishonesty. So this, of course, also applies to legal education. But if we look at very recently, right, you've got your GPT-4. So recently, GPT-4, I think they, recently it was in news that it passed the uniform bar examination with a 90 percentile. So you see here that it's going to there's going to be a need for legal education to change essentially because of the fact that ChatGPT is able to pass these supposedly very difficult exams that apply only for lawyers, right? So you see that this is an issue. But legal research suggests that ChatGPT is unable to provide details, but it can pass examinations. But with GPT-4, you see that already shifting. You see that it's also able to apply rules because for you to get 90 percentile, that has to have existed. So this is something that I think legal education needs to look at naturally. So as for litigation lawyers and legal processes, right. So here you've got very recent research on this actually. And I've also keyed in some prompts. We will look at that a little bit later. So ChatGPT actually has very advanced legal drafting templates. You've got, it can draft for you letters of demand without prejudice letters, pleadings even. And on a larger scale, it can also analyze simple facts and argue, have legal articulation on those simple facts. And it can even go so far as to help you with legal strategies. So there was a research that was conducted on this. And in Australia specifically, there was a law firm that prompted ChatGPT to create a statement of claim. So statements of claim are like, one of the first papers that you file, especially when you want to do a civil suit. That's your pleading, the first pleading that you would file, of course, after the writ of summons, you file the statement of claim. That's on the plaintiff side if you want to push a case, right? So this law firm prompted ChatGPT to create a statement of claim, and it was found that that statement of claim was equivalent to that produced by a first-year lawyer. So what does this mean for the future of the industry? That's where we come to the next question of, can ChatGPT replace lawyers? So there was a law professor that after some research and some time that he spent on ChatGPT, he found that ChatGPT is able to conduct IRAC. So what is IRAC? IRAC is issue rationale, analysis, and conclusion. So this is one of the first things you learn before you become a lawyer. It's your lawyering 101, if you will. So the professor found that it's able to conduct IRAC, but so does this mean that all lawyers will be relevant? So not necessarily. He says that it still lacks critical thinking skills, and I agree with this. Actually, you'll see with my prompts why we say that it's not really a perfect thing yet. Not yet, maybe in future, but right now no, because you have to also look at the fact that ChatGPT isn't able to read between the lines. Only a human lawyer can do that, and you've got another level to that. Is if you have litigation lawyers, for instance. ChatGPT cannot go and stand in court for you, right? So you've still got that human touch. It still exists right now. So far, for now at least, what you see the impact of ChatGPT will be for the legal field is that it will supplement the work of lawyers. It will not yet replace them, not now at least. Maybe ChatGPT 4 can, or maybe ChatGPT 5 if it ever comes to that. All right, so let's look at my prompt. So I prompted ChatGPT to create a letter of demand. So I'm going to show you now, this is the letter of demand that we came up with. Of course, I just put in a very simple prompt here. But I noticed some things that I would say any other lawyer would notice as well. So one thing is you see that it uses the word I a lot. I am writing, I have provided, therefore I'm left with no other option. I urge you to settle, I look forward to your prompt response. So first of all this is very colloquial. No lawyer would ever draft a letter of demand like this. It would be very neutral. This wouldn't be the way a lawyer would go about it. So what does this mean in context, right? So if, say, a lawyer had put in maybe like a small prompt without personal information, of course, for a draft letter of demand, the lawyer would have to put in a lot of effort to change all these terms. So the lawyer would naturally just go back to a draft that they've used maybe 100 times before. So that means that it can't really replace the current procedure. That's my observation, is that it's still not perfect yet. The ChatGPT is still, it's kind of like on the fence. I would say that in some respects, it seems really advanced, but on another hand, it's kind of missing a lot of very key aspects of real legal documents. Let's look at a statement of claim that I asked it to produce. So I asked ChatGPT to produce for me a very simple statement of claim. I mentioned the Contracts Act as well. So you see, at the first instance itself, it's already made an error. It said in the High Court of Malaysia. So of course we know it's in the High Court of Malaya. And from there itself, you see that this will not be able to be used. And you can already tell from the first instance there's already an error. So that means it's just not sustainable. It's an idea that we have. It looks very interesting. It looks almost like, some parts of it really mirror a real statement of claim. But of course, at the end of the day, you can't actually use this. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I wouldn't say that it's going to replace lawyers just yet, but it's definitely heading into a direction that means that lawyers will have to change and will have to offer something new. We can't just focus on paperwork anymore, because our paperwork will just not be enough, because programs like ChatGPT will be able to replace us soon. Maybe not right now, but soon. A lot of paperwork can be done by ChatGPT. So that means we will have to offer something that is better than what ChatGPT can offer. And we will have to focus more on our practical skills rather than our paperwork skills. Now, the last thing that I asked it to draft was actually a sale and purchase agreement. So clearly now, very suddenly, ChatGPT is telling me that it doesn't have legal expertise. But for the first two instances you saw, it was very confident with its abilities. But here you see all of a sudden it's like, no, I can't do it. I'm sorry. You must consult a qualified lawyer. So you see here, there's a bit of a strangeness to ChatGPT. It's almost like sometimes it's like a very advanced old professor and very senior lawyer, but sometimes it's like a teenager. So this is one of those instances, I would say, where it's more of a teenager, which I think is the criticism that they have put towards the Microsoft AI. So you see that actually with ChatGPT as well. Now that we've talked about the impact, right, I want to move into regulation. And I want to first focus on why it's so urgent to regulate ChatGPT. So you see here, this is a statement that OpenAI CEO made. So even he has agreed that there are a lot of potential negative impacts to ChatGPT, and regulation is very important. So he focused on the issue of disinformation. But you see the OpenAI developers, the people behind OpenAI have actually, he's not the only one who's mentioned this actually. They have admitted to the fact that it needs regulation. So that goes to show how big of an impact ChatGPT really has and how important it is actually to regulate it. It's not just a theoretical question anymore. If you see that, OpenAI CEO himself is talking about it, it's definitely something that needs to be done very soon. Now let's talk about, we've talked about why we need regulation, but let's talk about why it's a challenge to regulate ChatGPT. So the first issue you have is speed, actually. So when you look at our current systems, right, we've got a lot of times we throw hard laws. We throw hard law basically at things to solve problems. A lot of our problems, legal problems, like when criminals make an error, we have hard law to put liability. So you've got things like your penal code, your federal constitution. But for AI, and if you look at ChatGPT, this kind of legal rules just doesn't work. It's unsustainable. So you've got, right now what you see the problem is, in short, is that you've got 20th century legal rules that you are trying to apply to 21st century problems. So you see ChatGPT is actually a 21st century problem. And legal rules just don't work because, okay, let's just look at one example, right? We talked about intellectual property just now. Copyright issues, right? Copyright issues basically focuses on, you can't recreate, you can't reproduce, you can't make copies. But when you talk about ChatGPT, it's spreading like wildfire. All this information you've got, it's spreading very fast. So the idea that your first point would be to throw sand. You say that I want to slow down the gears of ChatGPT, but that kind of thought process is actually short term. So instead, what we need to do actually is to have new rules. And these new rules must be able to predict problems faster. Because if we want to solve the problems of ChatGPT, we must first identify it quickly. Because if we wait too long, what happens is that problem would have been so dissipated into society that you can no longer control it. It's too far gone, basically. So you need to do it fast. So speed is something that we need to work on. Now, another issue with ChatGPT, and this applies to basically all forms of AI, is the fact that it has that human aspect. So ChatGPT, the issue here is human intervention. When ChatGPT breaks laws, right? For instance, who is accountable? This is a question because when we talk about AI, we always talk about how they they have their own consciousness, basically. So ChatGPT also, there is an argument to be made that it has a bit of its own consciousness. So most people would consider the human in the loop approach. So you need to have some kind of human intervention. We'll talk about this a bit later as well. And the last issue, and this is actually one of the major issues, is opacity. So what does opacity mean? Opacity means that humans don't really comprehend AI. AI in general is new for a lot of us, and it's only understood by a very small sector of society, fully understood, that is. What we see is the flickering shadows cast by a fire behind them. So this is Plato, right? One of the, he's a very learned professor in Singapore, so he mentioned Plato. To understand why we have an issue with AI is that all we see is the flickering shadow, and there's a fire behind it. So we see a very small part. There's actually a huge aspect of AI that we don't understand. And that's why we have problem regulating it. So this is where we need to highlight specific concerns, and there needs to be a lot of transparency for users, especially, because users are the ones who will really suffer in this context. Users of ChatGPT as well. They are the ones who will have the most to lose when it comes to legal issues. Okay, so this is a quote by René Descartes. So he says, "I think, therefore I am." Right? This is something that he conceptualized, and in this point, what he was discussing was the very fact that I'm thinking, that means I'm a human. So the question is, for AI, the very fact that it's thinking, does that make it a conscious being? And if so, does that mean that we need to attach legal personality to it? Does that mean that that's okay to let AI have its own consciousness? So the answer to that is, for regulation specifically, maybe, but it needs still human intervention and human control. So I'll talk about how that looks in terms of, we've got some AI soft instruments around the world that we can look at and maybe in Malaysia create in the future. So at the end of the day, you do need some human control. So Descartes, although it sounds really good, although it sounds great that AI would have its own consciousness, that creates an additional problem, because then you would have to attach legal personality to it, like we attach legal personality to corporations. So that's something that wouldn't really be recommended at this stage, for now at least. Just to be fast about it, soft law instruments would be better. And we will look at which soft law instruments we can use for reference. Right. So the best means of regulating. So you see traditional hard law, I mentioned that it doesn't work. Now, why is that so? So traditional hard laws, we have a problem with them because, first of all, it's a very slow-moving regulatory process. And as we know, ChatGPT, AI in general, moves very fast. You see, within the span of a few months, you had ChatGPT graduating to ChatGPT 4. You had ChatGPT 3, now it's GPT 4. So as you see, it's moving very fast. And regulatory process, when it comes to hard law, moves very slow. It's a snail's pace, basically. So there's a problem with adaptability, and it's inflexible. And that also comes to the second point, which is volume of rules associated to modern regulatory practices. There's a kind of, I don't want to use the word, but it's over-bloated. So you can't have that kind of style of regulation for ChatGPT. It just wouldn't work, because what it means is that innovation would be, would be impeded, basically. You would stop innovation, and you need to let innovation flourish. And to do that, you need soft governance. And of course, you have the third problem is lack of proper categorization. The thing about hard law is that it hasn't been able to categorize emerging technologies and then put them under the proper regulatory authorities. So basically, the gist of it is that hard law doesn't work for AI, and specifically not for ChatGPT. So what do you need then? You need soft law. You need soft governance. This is something that has been conceptualized, but we haven't got anything like that in Malaysia. In Malaysia, we don't have a law on AI, no specific law. What we have is a roadmap. So that roadmap is it's just an idea of what we want to do with AI. We want to have it, and we want to have like policies and things like that. That's what the roadmap is all about. You can Google it, but it's not a law, nor is it a regulation. So we need something like an anticipatory approach, following guidelines. So we've got some key markers right now. You've got things like the OECD Council recommendation. You've got the Beijing AI principles. Let's look at that a bit. So you've got the OECD Council recommendation. So some of the values, right, in this recommendation you can bring in. We can create one in Malaysia. I would suggest something like that in Malaysia, or maybe have a global one. Right now, we don't have a global AI regulation either. So if we had a global one, like you have your UN, Human Rights Convention, if you had something like that for AI, that would work better because you see a lot of technologies coming up. We need something like that. So some of the points that is important to note from the OECD one is that AI actors should respect the rule of law. That's under human-centered values and transparency. So we talked about transparency just now. You see, AI, one of the biggest issues is opacity, right? So to address opacity, you need transparency and you need explainability and you need accountability as well for AI. Because when you talk about AI breaching copyright laws, like we looked at earlier, you need someone to be accountable for these kinds of things. And you also need like the developers to take account of all these errors, I would say, that AI makes. This also applies to disinformation, actually, because when you look at ChatGPT, there's also an issue with disinformation. And then you've got the AI principles. So the AI principles I'm bringing in because, first of all, the first point is be responsible. The first point that I think is of worthy mention is that developers must have sufficient considerations for legal, social impact. And the second one, I feel, is something that we really need to look at, informed consent. You see, a lot of times, like we saw earlier with the problem with personal data, right? It's you have consent, but is it informed consent? So that's something our regulation must have, is that the consent must be informed. So the users must know, they must be sufficiently knowledge must be on them that, this is what's going to happen to your data. They need to really know that. So a lot of times we're, ticking the boxes, we're clicking these terms and conditions without really knowing what's happening. But when it comes to ChatGPT, that needs to exist. So I would say these principles are important. And I've actually gathered, this is based on research as well. There are main themes in AI soft law. So there are a few AI soft governance principles. You've got them in like Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong. So if you look at all of these AI regulations, there are 6 main themes. So number 1 is human control. So we talked about human control earlier. We talked about AI having consciousness, the fact that ChatGPT has passed the Turing test. What's important here is ChatGPT still needs to have human intervention. And then you've got the issue of transparency. So that's another theme that you see in notable soft laws. And safety, that means your personal data and things like that should be. And actually ChatGPT, there needs to be an assurance that it is actually a safe, language model for us to use. And accountability. OpenAI needs to be accountable. So they can't have privacy policies like the one that they have right now. It's, like some people have described it as flimsy. We need something more, stronger. And to have that, you need maybe a global AI instrument that makes sure that anybody who creates these new programs follows these themes. And then you've got non-discrimination and privacy as well. So non-discrimination, because some of the things that ChatGPT produces, it reflects that it's biased actually. And privacy, we've already discussed that. That's an important point. So these are the 6 main themes in AI soft laws that needs to be global. And that needs to be, like in Malaysia, a specific one possibly. So there are 2 options here. Either we create a global AI soft law instrument, or we have one in Malaysia. Of course, ideally the global one. But the problem with global ones is it would be, it wouldn't be specific to any jurisdiction. So of course you would have some jurisdiction-specific issues as well. So Malaysia also has to come up with a framework, I would say. These are the things that we need to consider in the future. So in conclusion, right, what you have is a problem. And the problem, mainly from what I've discussed today, is that AI is new, it's fast, it's causing very unpredictable, maybe sometimes never before seen legal issues. But they are there. The legal issues are there. It's just that it's coming out in very unique ways, I would say. So the solution is that we need to move at pace with ChatGPT. We need to have laws that are fluid, that allow innovation. Our laws cannot be stifling and suffocating like your hard law, which is on most occasions very stifling and suffocating. And I would just like to share this quote, right? There is this quote by Graham Gilmore and Justice Antonin Scalia. The late Justice Antonin Scalia actually reworded it. So he says, in heaven there will be no law and the lion should lay down with the lamb. In hell there will be nothing but law and due process will be continuously observed. So in an ideal world, we don't want to have too many laws. We don't want to, just because ChatGPT is new and it's something that's sometimes a bit frustrating legally, let's just throw a bunch of laws at it. That wouldn't be great, because that would be a society that is close to what we look at in law in hell, because that's there's a lot of laws, there's due process needs to be observed. Well, ideally, we want something that's like a utopian world. So we want robots and humans to work together, and we want there to be kind of a symbiotic relationship. So to have that, this is my observation from the research that I've done. This is also an area that I've been researching on, something that's a part of my research for my master's as well. I would like that, our laws have soft laws, soft governance. So that means that AI still can exist. It can be allowed to breathe. There's room for AI to breathe. There's room for ChatGPT to grow and flourish. But there is regulation as well. So that means users are not, ultimately victims as well. So that's all I have to say. And I hope that, maybe there's some questions as well.
Great. So I just like to touch on a few points that you mentioned, and this is all based off my experience in practical use of ChatGPT in the past couple of months in Thomas Philip. So going back to the point of impact of ChatGPT, when it comes to litigation lawyers, I would agree one of the points that Parveen touched on was the technical documents not being up to par. So on the point of accuracy, I would just like to say that accuracy comes from speaking to field experts. It doesn't solely come from books, which is the main source of ChatGPT right now. Accuracy comes from the interdependence of industry sectors and legal field. And that dynamic interaction in itself is a whole topic, I believe. But I'm here to tell you that depending and establishing relationships with your clients and keeping up to date with their industry is the competitive edge that you want to have as a lawyer, as their expertise and your best practices will result in a valuable, accurate transactional that will benefit both parties. So that I would say more on the in-depth of writing legal documents. ChatGPT is on its way, but from my current observation, it is still lacking here and there, and I will conforming or at the level of satisfactory to the way that at least we at Thomas Philip would write our legal papers. Okay, and then the third point, which was whether or not ChatGPT will replace lawyers. So I read a report by the Law Society titled AI and the Legal Profession. This was written in 2017. So, I mean, I'm quite glad that we're having this conversation, even though it's 2023, but in other countries, they're way ahead of us in terms of using AI in the legal industry. So they said that the legal industry will face some meaningful implications, which are listed in 4 ways. So the first one is a decrease of number of lower grade legal jobs. So it is said in the report that by 2036, 100,000 jobs in the legal sector have a high chance of being automated. Though we don't have the specific numbers in Malaysia currently, but through my observation, this will most likely be true, as my experience has ChatGPT has catalyzed my workflow as a leader, meaning that I use ChatGPT, but not for the technical parts, but I can use it for menial things that interns can do, paralegals can do. And I know that in the US, they are coming up with many AI ChatGPT based solutions or softwares, which they call legal assistants. And right now in Malaysia, we don't have such things, but I see it coming to our industry soon enough. Okay, the second point in the report is that there will be an increase of new legal skill sets. And I really believe that not only do lawyers have to upgrade skills such as contract management, but I also believe that because of ChatGPT, they will need to increase their business acumen. I'm not just saying this because this is the direction that our law firm is going towards right now, but I do believe that the future is lawpreneurship. And ChatGPT will only expedite the process even further because you need to have, further skill sets. We will most likely see emergence of new roles. Example, AI legal analyst. I believe that we are working on towards those kind of roles in the future. The third point would be greater number of blended educational programs. I must admit that I myself am a product of blended educational programs. So for the viewers' information, Ms. Parveen and I were actually classmates in law school. But after a while, I switched my majors to a completely different field where I acquired design technology and business skills. However, I do believe that the current local universities programs are on track, as I'm currently seeing the re-emergence of major minor bachelors within my interns. So that's a good, on a positive note. Last on the point is that by replacing some tasks and humans with machines, law firms could also reduce service costs. Though I kind of doubt this due to the fact that software in itself can be quite a big of an overhead cost to a law firm. However, based on the report, it could have a positive impact on the market where it could boost a demand for legal services from a market who could not afford it previously. So, okay. So that's on my point, whether or not ChatGPT will replace lawyers. Probably not in the near future, but there will be processes where they can take over some roles of the lawyers, but not high-skilled roles. Okay, what do you think about that, Parveen?
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, when we look at what they've like research and my own experience with ChatGPT. Of course, I'm only using the GPT-3. As I know, from what we see, ChatGPT-4 is rather more advanced than ChatGPT-3.
Right.
I mentioned as well, it passed the bar exam with a 90%. So it's actually able to have legal argumentation. It's able to articulate legal points. It's insane in a sense, but it's also like you kind of saw this coming with blockchain technology as well. How it creates smart contracts.
Definitely.
You already saw this kind of dawn of a new era in a sense. But I would say ChatGPT really has moved the industry as well. The legal it forces, I would say, it forces us to move, because the legal industry,
it forces, definitely.
To some degree, it's quite entrenched. It's something that's very traditional. You've got a lot of history behind it. Even in Malaysia, you've got the tradition of the bar. All these things are very tradition based, but when you talk about the work of a lawyer, right, I would say that ChatGPT is able to do the paperwork. Even if you key in the right prompts, I would say that it can do a lot of work for you. Even legal research, it can simplify it for you. Maybe it can't do the legal research for you because there's a lot of issue with its referencing.
Right.
Thing, and that's something I've experienced as well. Its sources are a bit questionable, but simple legal research it can do for you. So it can make your work a lot easier if you know how to use it. So it's something that we need to welcome. AI, we need to welcome it. We can't be afraid of it. But I would say this isn't a problem with millennials and Gen Z. I think Gen Z and millennial lawyers as well, I think they would be very welcoming of ChatGPT. As you know, there is something called I think, if I'm not mistaken, there is something called the Zoom lawyer generation. So, lawyers that were trained during the pandemic. So they studied law online.
We have such lawyers.
So, of course, they're going to be very comfortable with this kind of technology. So we need to be comfortable. Those of us who were trained before the era of online learning will also have to be comfortable with ChatGPT. We will also have to realize our own weaknesses, realize that, maybe we're not all that great. We need to change our that systemic kind of viewing of things. Even like legal education, I would say there needs to be a change to it. Like I think I talked about
Agreed.
This. One mentioned IRAC, right? So IRAC is something that we all know. Maybe we need to be more than just IRAC. We need to focus on critical thinking. We need to first understand what critical thinking is. What does that mean in a practical sense? And have that in our legal education. Maybe our legal education needs to
definitely.
I would say lawyers need to have, this is just my opinion. I'm not saying this is fact. I'm just saying that in future, I believe that no one will be one thing. We're not just going to have doctors who are doctors, or lawyers who are lawyers, or engineers who are just engineers. We're going to have multiple skills. We're going to have to bank on that, because when you have something like ChatGPT, it can do a lot of your menial work for you. So, how do you stay relevant? That's my question. It's just,
I completely agree with that point. And even based off the lawyers that we have. So this is my personal opinion, but I do believe that law degree should be a second degree. And this is quite noticeable in some of our lawyers as well, because we hire lawyers who have had a prior education in something else. So we've had lawyers who were educated in engineering field and then came to study law. The difference in their skills, firstly, in the combination of their skills and how it leads to them being better lawyers or having more advantage than other one-track way lawyers. So definitely, I agree that having lawyers who are open or exposed to other subjects in legal education would definitely benefit them further, because I also think that nowadays the trend for in-house lawyers is growing in all corporations. So there is a need for lawyers who can be adaptable in different industries, whether it be technical skills or whether it be design thinking skills or other fields that require a certain specialty that one must go through and learn before being able to kind of go around the laws and produce something creative to defend or work for the company. Okay. Are there any questions? Let me just ask from Pang. Okay. Okay. So okay, hold on. Just to kind of get our viewers on the same page, we have viewers on YouTube streaming live, and we have some on Zoom. Welcome again. Okay, just to wrap things up, right? Let me just go back to the points that Parveen mentioned in her presentation. So, yeah, I've also tested the accuracies of the data, right? Of course, they proclaim it firsthand that it's not up to date. And I believe what you say is true regarding the inaccuracies is stuck on the ChatGPT, whereby I've tried to even give feedbacks to ChatGPT. Oh, this is the wrong information. You're talking about the wrong person, or but it doesn't fix it immediately. So it's not kind of like, it's not like Wikipedia. If you've Wikipedia is a community contribution platform. So in Wikipedia, you can expect the changes to go in about 2 or 3 days. So in ChatGPT, I haven't seen that, despite me having kind of given the feedback a couple of weeks back. So I'm not really sure whether
No, actually, Alya, I just wanted to say that that's true, because you see, like, I tried to ask it a question, quite a simple one. I just said, who's the current Prime Minister of the UK? So if you ask ChatGPT that question, it's going to say Boris Johnson. And no matter how much you convince it otherwise, it will continue to say Boris Johnson. It may apologize and say, no, you're right. It's Rishi Sunak. You're right. You're so right. But then, you open up another chat box and again, it says Boris Johnson, and I'm sorry, you're wrong about it. But that's just how it works right now. But I think this is just GPT-3. I'm not sure GPT-4 whether these problems have been solved. Of course, I haven't got access to that. But that's because I think the knowledge base is capped there. And this, of course, would be a problem in law as well, because law generally moves very fast. So if you've got, especially if you want to do legal research, that means ChatGPT off the bat is not going to be
reliable.
You definitely can't. I think you won't be able to do legal research, I would say, because like I said, law evolves so quickly. Within a year, you've got a lot of changes. So it can't be a reference point unless that aspect of it changes. Only then you can use it for research, legal research. So right now you've got templates. So of course templates, they are the same, but if there's a change in law to make the template different, then you've got a problem there as well. And I would say, generally speaking, right, when you talk about our jurisdiction, the knowledge base would be less, because ChatGPT would have been fed information from all over the world. And I'm not sure how much of knowledge, Malaysian-based knowledge, it has. Like, even if you ask industry-specific legal questions to ChatGPT, it can answer broadly well, like over jurisdictions. But if you ask it specifically on Malaysia, it will say it doesn't have enough information. And that goes for legal research. Is problem. I would say you can't really conduct good legal research through.
Agreed. I think also, I mean, personally, I also would like to find out where do they get Malaysian information from. Like, I mean, on a personal level, usually I will go to, archive.org or archive from Singapore, because they just have so much history information, and not only pictures but also books, and yeah, basically anything in the past 100 or 150 years, right? So that's a resource, but I'm not sure whether, even though it's publicly available, I'm not sure whether ChatGPT has processed that information in terms of jurisdictionally, as you said. Okay, the next point would be, privacy. Parveen also touched on the privacy policies. So it's good that you went ahead and saw through the details and what could have been an inaccurate, or more I say, a vague details in their privacy policy. And we have to be mindful as Malaysians that certain cases are not covered by our PDPA, and it only covers on commercial cases if you were to ever pursue it for litigation matters or and beyond. And then another thing is regarding the intellectual property. Parveen also touched on the most important is the risk of copyright violation, as there is no guarantee whether or not whatever that you cite from ChatGPT can be claimed as yours or not. Because if you want it to be claimed as yours and then suddenly you get sued and then you don't want to claim it as yours, then where does the where does the border lie, right? So I would say, copyright is the Section 37 of Copyright Act 1987 can be looked into and can serve as a guideline for AI or ChatGPT. Okay, for the fear,
Are there any questions from the floor? Maybe from Pang. Is there any questions?
Yeah.
Maybe Pang has a question for us. Pang, do you have a question for us? All right. Okay. So does that mean that we're at the end of this session, or are we still going? Oh, okay. All right. So,
yeah, we are actually okay.
Okay.
Okay, let me just to wrap things up. Thank you, Parveen, for all the really beautiful articulation of the ChatGPT, and I'm so happy that you are doing this research right now, and you will be completing your dissertation soon and your thesis soon. So hopefully, it will benefit the ChatGPT ecosystem as a structure to all industries, because I also have some friends who have been asking me about the session, whether or not the legal implications cover other industries. So for now, we are just covering the legal frameworks, but hopefully soon with all the webinars that Pang from ChatGPT Malaysia community will be holding, you can keep updated to our Facebook page basically. Yeah. Anything to say? Yeah.
No, I would just like to say I would actually just like to thank Pang for calling me on, because I think it's great to share, because that informs me as well, so it creates a sort of discussion, and I hope actually this creates a discussion for, let's have some AI regulation. Actually I discussed OpenAI CEO, but even Elon Musk said that we need to have AI regulation. It's something that exists jurisdiction wise, but not so much on a global basis. And I think in the future, we really need to have something like that, especially with ChatGPT. It's really permeated a lot of society. So you definitely need some regulation. You can't have something like that existing just in limbo like that. It wouldn't be healthy, and it wouldn't be very fair to users, I would say. So generally, I would just say the gist of today's webinar, if anyone is still here, I would say that let's regulate it and let's look at soft laws. Just go ahead and Google Beijing AI principles. It would be so great just to know it, because from that itself, you're already aware of kind of what your rights should be. So when you think about what your rights should be, you're far more aware of the impact of something like ChatGPT in a legal sense. So don't share your personal data to ChatGPT. Don't trust it. Always have that
definitely
distance from it. Don't ever trust it, because OpenAI has made its privacy policy in a way that you're kind of a victim of it. Anybody who uses it. So just know that. Just know that whatever information you key in, it's being retained. So just have that awareness. I would say that's maybe the gist of today.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, I feel like the regulations will inevitably come. It's just whether how it is implemented. And I hope they would come to your research soon, Parveen, and base yourself, make yourself an expert on the matter, as I believe that your approach is, one of the one that we are looking forward to have for our PDPA and other related regulations. Okay, I would like to thank all the viewers for joining us tonight, as well as Ms. Parveen Kaur, and also Pang, the organizer. And I guess that's all for tonight. Good evening.